When an avoidant finally experiences the silence they once created, it no longer feels peaceful. It begins to sound like everything they have lost. Their breaking point usually does not come when you cry, beg, or desperately try to keep the relationship alive. It comes later, when they finally understand that they pushed away the person who loved them with patience, loyalty, and genuine care. For a long time, distance feels like control to an avoidant. They convince themselves that independence keeps them safe, that emotional closeness will eventually hurt them, and that needing someone means losing themselves. So, when real love enters their life, they may not know how to receive it. Instead, they pull away, become distant, create doubts, or test how much the other person will tolerate. Every time you stayed, forgave them, and tried again, they could quietly assume you would always be there. Your consistency became part of their emotional safety. Even while they were creating distance, they knew somewhere inside that your love was still waiting for them. That belief allowed them to remain detached without fully facing the consequences. Then something changes. You stop reaching out, you stop chasing, you stop explaining yourself. You finally accept that you cannot force someone to open a door they keep choosing to lock. At first, they may feel relieved. They tell themselves they needed space and that everything is finally calm. They may even believe you will eventually return, just as you have before. But when the silence continues, that confidence begins to weaken. The distance that once protected them starts feeling like isolation. The quiet they once wanted becomes strangely heavy. They begin noticing your absence in places they never expected. A song reminds them of you. A memory appears without warning. They check their phone for no obvious reason. They remember your voice, your laughter, your patience, and the small moments they once treated as ordinary. What once looked like pressure begins to look like love. They start replaying conversations and realizing how many times you tried to understand them. They remember how often you stayed patient when they became cold, how many chances you gave, and how much emotional energy you invested without demanding perfection in return. Slowly, nostalgia becomes regret. This is where the illusion of control begins to collapse. They may have believed they were protecting themselves from vulnerability, but eventually they see that they were also protecting themselves from connection. They thought they were escaping emotional chaos, yet they were creating emotional emptiness. What they called freedom begins to feel like loneliness. An avoidant may not immediately feel the loss because emotional reactions can be delayed. In the beginning, they can numb themselves with work, friends, entertainment, distractions, or even new people. They convince themselves that moving forward is easy, but distractions cannot erase meaning. Eventually, the quiet becomes impossible to ignore. They begin realizing that they did not lose you because you suddenly stopped caring. They lost you because their repeated withdrawal made you feel unseen, unwanted, and emotionally exhausted. That realization can hurt more than the separation itself. And then they may reach out. Sometimes it is a simple message. Sometimes they mention an old memory. Sometimes they make a small excuse to reopen communication. It may not initially come from complete emotional clarity. Fear can come first. The fear of being forgotten, replaced, or permanently shut out. But if you remain silent and maintain your boundary, they are forced to confront something uncomfortable. They were never completely in control of how this story ended. They begin understanding that your love was not weakness. Your patience was not something they were entitled to. Your presence was not guaranteed. For a dismissive avoidant, your presence may have quietly become part of their emotional world. You were the person they could rely on without having to admit they needed anyone. They could create distance while still knowing someone cared. Once that safety disappears, the difference becomes painfully obvious. They thought solitude would make them stronger. Instead, they discover that being alone does not automatically create peace. Because peace is not simply the absence of another person. Sometimes what looks like peace is actually emotional numbness. Real peace comes from feeling safe enough to connect, communicate, and allow yourself to be known. That is why the memories can become so powerful after you are gone. They stop focusing only on the moments that felt difficult and begin remembering the tenderness, your patience, your laughter, the way you tried to understand them, the comfort they once received from simply knowing you were there. And the hardest realization may be this: they were so afraid of losing their freedom that they never noticed they were slowly losing the person who made them feel safe. Their walls once looked like protection. Eventually, those same walls can become a prison. They may finally recognize that what they called strength was sometimes fear. What they called independence was sometimes avoidance. What they called peace was sometimes simply the absence of intimacy. The real breaking point is not always the moment you walk away. It is the moment they understand you are no longer waiting on the other side of the wall. That is when silence changes meaning. It stops representing freedom and starts revealing consequence. It reminds them that love does not chase forever. Patience has limits, and someone who genuinely cared can eventually choose themselves. They may have thought they were protecting their heart by keeping you at a distance. In the end, they may discover that the greatest pain was not letting love get close. It was realizing they had pushed it away when it was already there. And sometimes, the most painful part of losing someone is not discovering that they stopped loving you. It is discovering that they loved you deeply, gave you countless opportunities to meet them halfway, and eventually became strong enough to stop waiting. They once believed they had everything under control. But when you are truly gone, and the silence becomes impossible to ignore, the emotions they buried begin rising to the surface. The moments that once made them uncomfortable can suddenly feel precious. The affection they once considered overwhelming starts to feel comforting. The care they once escaped from begins to look like the safety they were searching for all along. And this time, you are not there to make the realization easier. They have to sit with their own regret. Avoidant people don't simply miss someone's presence. They often miss the rare feeling of being completely understood without having to pretend, perform, or explain themselves. You saw beyond their distance. You looked past their emotional walls and noticed the parts of them they tried desperately to hide. You offered acceptance even when they struggled to offer vulnerability in return. That is what can stay with them. They begin replaying the moments they mishandled, the conversations where honesty could have changed everything, but they chose silence. The opportunities to stay that they replaced with distance. The messages they ignored, the apologies they never offered, and the affection they held back because showing too much felt dangerous. Eventually, they may begin seeing those memories differently. What they once called pressure starts looking like peace. What they called control starts looking like connection. What they thought was confinement begins to look like emotional safety. And the painful part is that they can no longer reach for it as easily as before. This is the contradiction of avoidant behavior. They build walls, believing those walls will protect their hearts, yet those same walls can become the reason their hearts suffer. They assume distance will prevent rejection, vulnerability, and heartbreak. But while trying to avoid emotional pain, they can create another kind of pain through neglect. Love rarely disappears because of one difficult conversation. It can slowly disappear when one person repeatedly shuts the other out, refuses emotional closeness, and leaves the other person feeling unseen. For someone who associates vulnerability with danger, genuine intimacy can feel threatening. Being loved deeply means being visible. It means allowing another person close enough to discover fears, insecurities, and wounds. If they learned early in life that depending on people leads to disappointment, they may decide that needing no one is safer. So when someone truly loves them, that person can become both what they desire and what frightens them. They want closeness, but fear losing independence. They crave affection, yet become uncomfortable when intimacy becomes real. They move closer and then retreat. They may create problems where none existed because finding a reason to leave feels easier than admitting they are afraid to stay. But eventually, they may realize the pattern did not protect them. It simply taught the person they loved that being close to them was painful. Every time they swallowed affection, avoided difficult conversations, chose pride over honesty, or disappeared instead of communicating, another piece of the connection disappeared with it. They begin confusing emotional numbness with peace and avoidance with strength. But numbness is not safety. It is emptiness, and even familiar emptiness can eventually become unbearable. At first, they may convince themselves that losing you was for the best. They can appear completely unaffected. They may continue working, socializing, laughing, and presenting a normal life. They might even believe their own performance. But avoidant emotions can arrive later. The loss may not fully register when you first leave. It can become real when the messages stop, when you no longer check on them, when you stop waiting, and when they finally understand that your absence is permanent rather than temporary. Then the memories become louder. They remember the affection they rejected, the comfort they withheld, the moments they could have said, "I'm sorry," and the times they could have simply stayed present instead of disappearing. Slowly, they may understand that they weren't protecting their heart. They were isolating it. They begin realizing that love itself was never the enemy. Their fear was. Pushing people away did not eliminate pain. It only postponed the moment when they would have to feel it. And when that moment finally arrives, they have to face not only the loss, but the role they played in creating it. They may even recognize that the person they rejected was someone who saw them with compassion rather than judgment. Someone who noticed their fear and still tried to understand them. Someone who gave them opportunities to become emotionally open without demanding perfection. Now, those opportunities exist only in memory. The destruction is rarely dramatic. It happens quietly, through repeated withdrawal, unspoken feelings, emotional distance, and small decisions that slowly create an enormous gap. Each time ego wins over empathy, another brick is added to the wall. And eventually, the person who once fought to keep the relationship alive learns to fight for themselves instead. That can become the true breaking point. Not when love disappears, but when they understand that their own behavior helped destroy it. Their outside world may never reveal what is happening inside. They can continue going to work, meeting friends, posting photographs, and acting completely fine. Avoidant people can become very skilled at making emotional suppression look like composure. But the real collapse often happens in private. It appears during sleepless nights, quiet mornings, random memories, and moments when every distraction finally stops working. It appears when they are alone with thoughts they can no longer outrun. The same walls that once gave them comfort begin feeling like a cage. They remember how you looked at them with tenderness. They remember the patience in your voice and the countless ways you tried to reach them. At the time, that kind of love may have felt too intense. Now, in the absence of it, they may realize it was exactly what they needed. Their pain doesn't necessarily look like tears. Sometimes it looks like restlessness, overthinking, checking old conversations, revisiting memories, wondering what might have happened if they had simply communicated instead of withdrawing. It is not only the pain of missing you, it is the realization of what they lost. They may eventually understand that the person who once kept forgiving them has finally learned to choose themselves. And that truth can be devastating because there is no argument to fix it. No explanation can undo every moment of emotional neglect. The silence that once felt comforting now feels different. It is no longer freedom. It is consequence. They begin seeing that their independence was sometimes fear disguised as logic. It was easier to push you away than to confront the vulnerability they felt around you. But once they can no longer hide from that truth, everything they avoided begins arriving at once. They finally experience a fraction of what they made you experience, feeling alone, unseen, uncertain, and desperate for a connection that was slowly disappearing. And perhaps the hardest realization is that they never expected you to truly heal. They believed your empathy would keep you attached. They counted on your patience. They assumed your hope would survive every withdrawal. They thought you would remain available whenever they decided to return. But eventually, you stopped waiting. And that is when their silence becomes something they can no longer control. They believed that if they ever decided to come back, you would still be exactly where they left you. That assumption became their safety net. Even when guilt started creeping in, they could comfort themselves with the thought that you still cared and would probably be there whenever they were ready. But then they see something they never expected. You are okay. Your energy is no longer reaching toward them. Your silence no longer feels like you are waiting for them to return. It feels like freedom. And that is when the illusion they built around themselves begins to collapse. They start realizing they were never as powerful as they imagined. They didn't simply lose a relationship. They lost the emotional stability they had quietly come to depend on. Avoidant people can sometimes confuse someone's attention with their own importance. Your love made them feel valuable. Your patience made them feel wanted. Your constant effort gave them reassurance. Even when they weren't giving the same emotional energy back, knowing that you cared gave them a sense of security. When that attention disappears, they are left alone with the emptiness they once avoided. At first, they may protect themselves with excuses. They tell themselves you've changed. They convince themselves that you became cold, or that perhaps you never cared as much as they believed. But eventually, those explanations stop working. The truth becomes impossible to escape. You didn't suddenly stop caring, you healed. You didn't become heartless, you became free. You didn't necessarily stop loving them. You simply stopped abandoning yourself to keep loving someone who could not meet you emotionally. That is where regret begins to settle in. It may not immediately make them call or send a message. Sometimes regret is much quieter than that. It grows through memories and comparisons. They remember how strong you were during difficult moments. They remember how patiently you tried to understand them when they couldn't even understand themselves. And slowly, they may recognize something painful. The version of you they once considered too emotional was often the version that loved them most sincerely. But that version of you is no longer available. You have changed. You no longer feel responsible for repairing people who refuse to face themselves. You no longer need to prove that your love is valuable. You no longer measure your worth by whether someone chooses you. Your healing removes the influence they once had over your emotions, and that can shake an avoidant deeply, because they often live with the assumption that access will always remain available. They may believe that distance is temporary, and that whenever they feel ready, they can return to the same emotional comfort they left behind. They never expected you to build a life where they were no longer necessary. They thought healing meant waiting until the pain disappeared. But real healing meant becoming someone who no longer needed the old story to continue. When they finally see that the love you once gave has transformed into self-respect, their ego can take its hardest hit. The regret is not simply about losing the relationship. It is about losing the version of you that accepted less, waited longer, forgave repeatedly, and kept trying to reach them. Now they are looking at someone they once took for granted, realizing that person has become emotionally unreachable. They may finally understand that the love they rejected was not trying to trap them. It was offering them a chance to experience genuine connection. It could have remained if they had been willing to face their fears and participate fully. While they were running away from discomfort, you were learning how to move through it. While they were protecting themselves from change, you were transforming. While they remained trapped in the same emotional patterns, you were becoming stronger. And that reversal changes the meaning of loss. They are no longer simply missing a person. They are confronting the loss of familiarity, emotional reassurance, and the certainty that someone would always be there. Their deepest regret may not be the ending itself. It may be watching you become everything they once needed, but were too afraid to fully appreciate. They see your calmness, your confidence, your independence, the stability you developed after surviving what once broke you. They may recognize that the emotional safety they searched for was present in the connection they kept pushing away. But now you carry that safety within yourself. That is the part they cannot take back. Love does not always disappear when it is neglected. Sometimes it changes form. Sometimes it becomes wisdom. Sometimes it becomes boundaries. Sometimes it becomes self-respect. And yours transformed. Your healing did not mean you never cared. It meant you finally understood that loving someone should never require you to abandon yourself. That is when their pride can finally crack, because they are forced to face the truth they spent so long avoiding. You did not become less loving. You simply became unwilling to settle for love that could not meet you halfway.